This is the Bevo Buckets podcast on the Burnt Orange Sports Network. I'm Will Iger here with Ryan Hopper and Seth Berger. And every Tuesday, we'll be on the BOSN YouTube page to talk Texas basketball from around 30 minutes to an hour. We will also discuss some of the biggest storylines in college basketball. First, gentlemen, how are we doing?
Living the dream.
Yeah, I can't complain. Staying busy, that's a good thing.
I don't want to say it was a quiet week for the University of Texas men's basketball team because it was not the best performance on Saturday night against South Carolina. They did only have one game where they lost to the Gamecocks 84 to 69. It was South Carolina's first conference win in 13 games. They ended a 12-game losing streak going into their matchup against Texas. And this game was not a contest from the start. In fact, South Carolina was up 40 to 22 at the end of the first half. And while Texas did outscore the Gamecocks in the second half, something they've done against many teams this year, they've had dominant second halves, but somehow just haven't been able to get off to the right start. Um, their second half performance and effort, especially from Trey Johnson ending the game at 29, was not enough. And it wasn't even enough to defeat one of the SEC's worst squads. And I'm going to say this again, but Seth Berger was right. Last week we had our game predictions. I thought Texas was going to steamroll the Gamecocks. That was not the case. Seth Berger made it clear that no road matchup in the SEC is an easy win, and it clearly wasn't for Texas on Saturday night. Hop, I'm going right to you in this game. What were your thoughts?
I think it is fair to say that, well, it's up there with a lot of bad first halves this year. Because notice, I feel like when we talk about the worst halves that this team has played this year, I think the only real contenders are first halves. They are a second half team, but when you're in such a big hole, and you don't get out, it's kind of like the old analogy with the frog in boiling water. The team just seems, and RT just seems to not realize it until it's too late. Um, they got done. Again, we've talked about their size issues. They got carved up on the glass, and when that happens on the road, and South Carolina has a crowd behind them, they can grow in confidence and get into the game. And, y'all touched on this I believe on the pod last week. Gamecocks hadn't won a conference game, but no team in the SEC, as Seth pointed out, is chopped liver. And they had competed in a ton of home games, so much so that I was kind of hoping that they would get that upset before they had to play Texas because I was nervous about this game. They played Auburn within 5 at home. They played Tennessee close at home, I believe. They went to Florida and were up by 13 points before completely self-destructing in the swamp. Um, they let Murray Boyles get going big time. He killed them. 10 boards for him, 22 points. This is just a bad loss, and we're going to talk about this going forward. It is put up or shut up time. Uh, Players' futures are on the line, jobs are on the line. This team's tournament resume is on the line. uh, you know, Playing in the NIT would just be such a failure for the NIL budget that this team had, which was still better than most, even if it may have been halfway through the SEC. You got a transformative freshman who's going to go in the lottery, a veteran like Kaluma with his resume, some good role players, guys who can defend, Jordan Pope and his acumen, and they can't go out sad like this, but they just might.
Yeah, I mean, like we talked about the last couple of weeks, South Carolina winless, and like you said, Ryan, I found myself in the same boat, hoping for the Gamecocks to grab one because this is not a team, a Texas team that I feel confident in night on, night in, night out, let alone going on the road in the SEC. It's the University of Texas. Whether they're good at basketball or not, it's a polarizing fan base. It's a polarizing university. people are going to get up to beat Texas, throw the horns down. And they got punched in the mouth right away. And like you said, they've been a second half team. There was no response in the first half. It was you don't want to dig yourself a hole down 18 at halftime on the road, regardless of what their record is. And here we are again with a Texas team that shows light that they show signs of life, but it's too late. You start to see them with the press working, and I call them fake rallies because it's almost like you're just stat padding and getting it closer to final box score. But at the end of the day, if you watch the game, that game was never a close game. This was a good old fashioned beatdown, courtesy of the Gamecocks, and props to them. They got their first win. They got the monkey off their back, so to speak. So but Texas, like you said, it's put up or shut up time. And if Texas wants to be there in March, they're going to have to win some big, important games on stretch against couple other teams that find themselves in very similar positions to Texas.
Yeah, you guys said a lot of things that I agree with there. First, one thing you guys alluded to was even though South Carolina was winless into the SEC up until Saturday night, some of those games were close. Ryan, you mentioned the Florida game where they blew a big lead. They only lost to Florida at home by one. They lost to Vanderbilt and Auburn by just 3 points. They lost to A&M by four, Ole Miss by four. I can go on and on about all their close losses on the year. And I think Texas definitely did overlook this Gamecock team going into the game. Specifically, Colin Murray-Boyles is the type of player that Texas has struggled with all year. I mean, you look at Murray-Boyles, he's a big man who can handle it. He's undersized, but he's strong. And Texas has trouble with those guys. I mean, you look at Kentucky, Amari Williams did a little bit different build, but he dominated Texas from start to finish, even though Texas beat Kentucky. Even the role players on Vanderbilt, Jeremiah Brakefield, the Ole Miss, lefty, similar to Murray-Boyles, he had success against Texas inside. And I think we saw that weakness of Texas's inability to defend players inside the key in big players. That was on full display on Saturday night. And you guys also both mentioned the team's first half struggles. I mean, only three players made a field goal in the first half for Texas. Big Z was 1 for 1. Kent made 3 field goals, and Trey Johnson hit 4 shots in that first half. The team shot less than 30% from the field. And most importantly, Texas's foul trouble was a huge issue in this game. They had 11 fouls in the first half. South Carolina shot 16 free throws in the first half. I can go on and on. They lost the turnover battle 6-2. I mean, talk a little bit more about free throws. Jamari Thomas had 15 points in the game in totals. 12 of those 15 points came off free throws, and that's a small point guard transfer from Norfolk State right there. Not disrespecting Norfolk State, great basketball program in HBCU, but I'm just saying Thomas is a great player, South Carolina's best guard. He hasn't had a lot of Power 5 experience yet. He was still able to dominate inside, creating foul trouble against the Horns. And so it's clear that that has been an issue all season, but it's just something that hasn't been fixed or addressed. And if Texas is going to want to make this tournament and not appear in the NIT, that's at the forefront of the team's issues, and it should be in Ronnie Terry's discussion with the team before the next 4 games this season, 4 winnable games.
Well, and just how they came out. I mean, first of all, I found this funny. So I was listening to the first part of it on the radio broadcast. Shout out the radio guys; they do a great job. Craig Way, the voice of the Longhorns. Sometimes Roger Wallace from KXCN is with them. Sometimes not. And it was Craig and I forget the color guy, but Craig goes, Texas fans will find this familiar. It's just shaping up to be one of those nights here in Columbia. It was just one of those nights, but how I understand that if shots aren't going in, shots aren't going in, but I just feel like something systemic is wrong here when they had an entire week to prepare for this game. No, it's not like this is a road trip after you had to go to somewhere tough on the road on Tuesday or Wednesday night. They just came out completely flat, and I hate to say this, I don't really think it was much of a talent discrepancy at all. I mean, Murray Boyles, like you said, he plays above his size. Where does that come from? That comes from conditioning and effort. Where has this team, I think, been lacking at points this season? Conditioning and effort. I think that some games you can say, oh, well, if they had Kendall Weaver to lock down a primary scorer, oh, if they had this, and you can make some legitimate excuses for them. But here, I mean, this is just, it's not like it was even a letdown spot where you got a big win in the middle of the week and, oh, we looked past South Carolina, we were riding high. What were they doing all week, guys?
I think you take a look. Let's take a look at the bigger picture here for a second. Outside of that 4 game stretch against the winning against Missouri, the win against A&M, a tough close loss on the road at Ole Miss, and then the absolute beatdown in Baton Rouge, this team hasn't really played great basketball. They kind of are. They are what they are. They're a mediocre basketball team that's struggles with physicality, struggles on rotational defense, and quite frankly, I mean, they've had injuries, but so is almost every other basketball team in the country. They've struggled to really have more than one, maybe two scoring options at a consistent basis. And when you look at the roster, I mean, part of that, yes, the NIL capability of the University of Texas. If you were to have a coach like, let's say, the beginning of the Chris Beard era, where people, boosters and fans were to get behind him, there's no doubt Texas could be at the forefront of the NIL space in basketball too. Rodney Terry has every right it's a two-way street. He has every right to complain, I can't succeed because you're not giving me the resources necessary to compete. But at the same time, when you look at his tenure as the head coach, they've regressed in a lot, not only on the roster, but just the way they've played basketball. The fundamentals sometimes are lacking. You just saw, I was watching that stretch from Jason. I know I rag on Jason Kent, it seems like here and there, but he goes up, one of the dumbest plays I've seen. He goes to the rim, grabs on the rim after the ball is clearly down. He was lucky they didn't call that offensive goaltending. And then he follows it up 20 seconds later with one of the worst flagrant ones, the most unnecessary flagrant ones I've seen all year. That's all, like, those are just plays that can be fixed not only with coaching, but just staying locked in and not being late. It's almost like a mental fatigue that you find this team falling into. That's just an example. I could go through everybody on the roster and finding a time when they've just let their guard down and been, sometimes it looks like they're just uninterested, not only let alone playing poor fundamental basketball. But this team, now you've got your final 4 games of the regular season. Three of the teams you're playing are somewhere between a 10 seed and first 4 teams out. So you're going to be playing teams that find themselves in the same predicament as you. You go grab 2 of those games. You can give yourself a mental reset. You go to Nashville, win one to be play it safe, or go win 3 at the end of the regular season, and you're in the tournament. And anything can happen in March. But I think at some point this team is what they are, and people clamoring for the offensive outburst that we saw from Trayvon Mark or Jordan Pope, it's just not going to happen. Those are just a once every 4 week type of experience that you're going to get out of those players.
Before we move on to Arkansas preview really quickly, curious what I mean, the players Texas brought in this past summer, Pope, Mark, Kaluma, talking more so about them than Kent and Larry, because Kent and Larry came from Indiana State, mid-major, etc. Pope, Kaluma, and Mark, well, not so Kaluma because he didn't play that much at Kansas State last year because of injury, but they were the guys at their respective schools. Mark at Arkansas, Pope at Oregon State. This year it's a little bit different playing with his Texas squad. Why would you guys say that is? Because I think Texas, if you look at how Pope, Mark, and Kaluma have played in the past in their college careers, they've been great players up to this year. What do you guys think that is? You think it's just not the right fit? Do you think that all three have had injury struggles? That's part of it. I'm curious about your guys' thoughts on just those 3 players overall and not living up to their expectations.
I would say some of it is down to coaching and the fact that, RT supposedly hangs his hat on being a much better defensive coach and locking in on the defensive side of the floor. And if we're being honest, none of those three were ever known for their defense. I think the thought was we're going to bring these scorers in, we're going to bring possibly the best scorer in the 2024 recruiting class in Trey Johnson. And then we're going to have guys like Weaver and everyone, because RT's a defensive guy, buy into the rotations and team defense and rebounding that supposedly Terry hangs his hat on. And I just don't think it ever fully came together. I think, honestly, the Trayvon Mark preseason injury hurt them with how he could be inserted into the offense. And then sometimes it is an individual player thing where these guys have all been the guy or the scoring option at other places, especially Mark and Pope, because I think, as y'all remember, Kaluma was kind of that second option on those good Creighton teams, with Kalkbrenner and those guys. Um, Pope and Mark just might be some of those players who it's hard for them to take a back seat. Like, you see this at the next level where if you get high usage on a bad team, you can look real, real good, but can you play a winning role on a good team? And of course, you see the opposite.
Seth,
Yeah, I mean,
you got anything on this?
uh, it's a puzzle. You're assembling guys, and look, when you're making portal evaluations, there's no guarantees. A guy like Jordan Pope, who's the it guy at Oregon State, coming over to Texas, he's probably you look at him, he's your number three, number four option. Sometimes guys can adjust to a role like that and play better basketball. You look at some players around the country, you look at what Alabama did. They were able to grab Cliff Amore from Rutgers, who was the way he played at Rutgers was a back to the basket kind of traditional old 80s, 90s big. The way he plays at Alabama, they kind of spread him out and he attacks the basket. He's more of a rebounder and he's been really successful in his role. So you look at transfers that sometimes are prominent transfers that play good basketball somewhere else and they're able to adjust to their next stop. And sometimes, and like Ryan said, look, you're dealing Trayvon Mark dealing with a big preseason injury that sidelined him for the first 2 months, a month and a half. So that's difficult. I'm sure it's still nagging. He's had other injuries flare up. It could have been part of the initial injury. So sometimes not only can that hurt you physically, but mentally you're not there. Anybody who's hurt themselves playing any sport knows when they come back, it's at the back of their mind, and you just got to let it go, play basketball, and that could be difficult. So I think you have some of it is maybe just misses on portal evaluations, some of it's injury, and sometimes you bring three guys in, like you said, Ronnie Terry's defensive coach. You bring three guys in to play to basically fill it up to score, and they don't. And now you have three guys who can't score that were brought in to score, and their defensive liabilities or just not up to snuff on defense. So then at that point, you're looking for the next tier of guys to step up, and you look at that next tier, a guy like Kendall Weaver could be that, and he's out for probably the rest of the year or at least considerable time now. He hasn't played in 2 months, so really a difficult spot to be in. But at some point, that falls on the coaching staff too. You assembled the roster. In this portal era, you have to be prepared for the guys bringing in. They might not be able to. Yeah, injuries happen, but like guys, you have to count on them not necessarily filling the stat sheet the way they did at their previous stop. It's a gamble.
Well, and can I just because you talked about the big picture earlier, I should have a couple things on this, right? Portal evaluations are hard. Like, we're not acting like we could do them, but Texas is a big athletic program with an infrastructure. Okay. There's about, I think off the top of my head, I think it's 354 Division I basketball programs in these United States. How many, I don't know the answer. Let's take a guess here. How many do we think have a GM? Because you're seeing FBS football programs like such as Alabama. They paid their GM like 10 million a year, basically, because in a way, with all the money in the NIL and how intertwined the collectives and the athletic departments are, you need a money guy and a roster builder, just like pro teams need a GM. Now, Texas basketball is Chris Ogden in his second year as a GM is he functioning as an extension of the staff, or is he functioning as a representative of Texas athletics and as more of a check, so to speak, on the staff? That's one question I have. Second question I have, you pointed out that 4 game stretch, particularly that seminal A&M win in which Tremont Mark had his best game of the season. I was talking with Cliffy from CBS Austin in the press box of Dish Falk Field yesterday when I was covering the baseball game. And he's like, man, where would they be without that miracle A&M comeback? And I said, the bubble would be damn near burst right now. And then third, on like a 40,000 feet level, look what's going on campus. Look at all the successful programs on campus. And then today, the women's program, great program, is #1 in the nation, whooping tail, while you guys are out here giving South Carolina, who had 0 conference wins, their first conference win with a whole week of rest. So we're not going to solve it all today, but there is just cracks in the foundation of this house.
That's a great way of putting it. It's really difficult for a pro CDC, and I'm sure it'll come up because he's got his town hall this week. You look around the athletic department, like you said, even the other program that shares the building with you, they're #1 in the country right now. They're a phenomenal team. They just went through an absolute gauntlet and came out unscathed. You look around the athletic department, year one with baseball. Now David Pierce was let go, and they were a good program, but not up to where Texas baseball should be. And right now, year one, they're a top 15 team. There's no doubt that Schloss will take them to the top 5, top 10 in the near future. You look at volleyball, 2 national championships in the last 3 years. You look at football, back-to-back semifinal playoff appearances. You look at rowing, perennial national champions, swimming and diving, national champs, tennis, ranked #1 in men's. It's like you look around the athletic department, golf, every team is good right now. Really
Yep.
good, except for men's basketball. And look, a lot of programs would kill to be in a spot where the really bad year where they're looking to fire the coach is still probably a tournament year like Texas is having. But you're not like other programs. You're the University of Texas. You expect to win. What's the quote? It's the pride in winning tradition will not be entrusted to the weak or the timid. It's it might sound cheesy to some, but it's true at the University of Texas. You're here to win at the highest level. This is the University of Texas. The resources are plentiful, matched by none other than maybe Ohio State. You're here to win in every sport. And when you look around and everybody's in the top 5, top 10, and you're on the bubble, it's tough, but it's hard for you to make a case that you got, especially when you've regressed over the last 2 years. It's hard to make a case that you're the man for the job. And I know he has very fair complaints that, hey, you're not giving me the resources the other coaches have compared to their sports. But at the same time, you need to show the fan base something, and losing to the team that hasn't won an SEC game in a blowout is not the way to get that done.
And what's crazy is the athletics program here is so successful and profitable that unknowingly you left out 2 programs that are sitting at #1 in their respective sports, I believe. I believe women's tennis is also #1. And now I'm forgetting softball. Softball's also
Softball, #1. Great programs all
Steve
around. You look
Devon's
around
striking
campus.
out like 16 hitters a game.
Hey,
Like,
you ranked #1. We're ranked #1. We're ranked 2. Oh, you guys suck. You're ranked third. Oh,
actually, we're on the bubble. Like,
yeah. All right. Yeah.
like,
Yeah, and
yeah.
there's a lot to kind of unpack there. One thing to make clear is I do think Texas invests in those sports a lot more than other universities do. So that's one thing, specifically at the coaching level. I mean, Texas, for their new beach volleyball program, brought in UCLA's beach volleyball program. He was a champion at UCLA before starting up this Texas one. I don't think other schools and athletic directors across the country are focusing on their beach volleyball programs per se. That being said, I get basketball, one of the premier sports in college athletics. So maybe Texas teams should have higher expectations or should be playing better than they are right now. And I'm not trying to play devil's advocate here, but I do think part of it is this year they've just gotten a little bit unlucky, especially with the injury bug to Kaluma, to Weaver, to Mark, specifically Kaluma and Mark, two guys who are trying to fit into a new team. It's not easy to fit into a new team when Mark's missing the first 5 games of the year and Kaluma's missing or has missed a big stretch of games, or arguably the most important point in the regular season, right? When Texas is playing up the best competition in the SEC. Another thing, the SEC basketball conference has not been this good in a while. 7 teams in the top 25, 4 teams in the top six. Um, so
Yeah, you
that's
can argue no conference has been as good ever. And we understand that, but I mean it's just tough. I mean, they're sitting at 5-9 in conference play. So the absolute best you can do is 500 in conference play. That's tough. I mean,
correct.
I guarantee you, baseball, Schloss is kind of rebuilding on the fly. I guarantee you, baseball will go above 500 in SEC play. And the SEC has been the dominant baseball conference for years now.
And it's
Right.
better this year than it has been in the past in baseball too. I mean, look at Oklahoma just went 3-0 this weekend in a premium baseball, but not to get too far in the weeds, but like the SEC is a beast and everything, and Texas is it's tough, but when you come to a place like Texas, you are expected to compete at the top, and it's tough to win. Coaches will tell you this. It sounds cliche, it sounds cheesy, but it is very hard to win when you're playing the best competition night in and night out.
That's true, but when evaluating players in the portal, I mean, it's hard for me to, obviously easy for me to say now that Mark Kaluma and Pope haven't panned out. But if you're evaluating them a year ago and seeing what they're doing at their respective schools, it's hard not to say, hey, why not try and take on these guys? Sure, maybe you look for more of the role player types that can fit in alongside of Trey Johnson. But I don't even know if at that point they knew Trey Johnson was coming to Texas. And another thing is Max Asmus, he was averaging 21 at Oral Roberts the year before he came to Texas. At Texas last year, he averaged 17. I know Asmus was the guy last year, and those 3 guys we brought into the portal this year alongside Larry and Kent um, were not expected to be the number one scoring threats because of Trey this year at Texas. But if I'm Texas, I'm looking what Asmus was able to do, and I'm like, wait, these guys are putting up numbers at these schools. Why can't they do the same here? But moving on, we do need to talk a little bit about Texas's 2 matchups this week, specifically the rematch against the Arkansas Razorbacks. The Razorbacks, they beat Texas 78-70 at the Moody Center a couple weeks ago. Now Texas heads to Fayetteville. Texas plays their Wednesday night on ESPN2 at 8 p.m. The first matchup, again, first half, not pretty. Second half, different story. John L. Davis, he put up 24, 5, and 4 steals against Texas. Clearly, that's where they missed Kendall Weaver. Texas did not shoot well from the field, had a lot of turnovers. And again, in that first half, they had 24 points and committed 8 turnovers. Arkansas, great starting 5, but not that deep. What are your guys' thoughts on the Arkansas matchup this Wednesday night?
I think I mean, we mentioned when we were talking about the athletic department that for any team, they're looking to scalp the University of Texas in any sport, especially with the pride a lot of these SEC schools have. Oh, Texas and OU are coming into this conference. Like we're gonna show them how the big boys really play. And football for the most part, except for Georgia, that didn't really work out well. Well, it did for everybody against OU, but Texas is in trouble on Wednesday night because Arkansas is an old rival of Texas's from the Southwest Conference. This rivalry goes back decades and decades. Texas is Arkansas's Super Bowl in almost any other sport. They have that little rival with Mizzou. I don't think it's quite the same, especially with the older fans. Arkansas have gotten themselves off the mat. They were looking like they were in a lot of trouble halfway through the season. They've scored some surprise wins, including the win at Moody. I mean, it's a must win. This is a team 16-11, like you are, 5-9 in the conference, like you are. I'm returning to our motif from earlier. It's put up or shut up time.
Yeah, I know I've been kind of the pessimist of the three when it comes to our predictions as far as how Texas will fare. As we've talked about, these next four really define the season here for Texas. And you're playing winnable games against teams in the same boat as you. But this one at Arkansas just doesn't feel right in any way. Texas looked terrible against South Carolina. Arkansas has been playing better basketball. And I know Hop mentioned this a few weeks ago. You look at the ticket prices at Bud Walton Arena, which is a big arena, by the way. On StubHub right now, it's starting without fees, starting at $301. Now that'll probably come down
Damn.
closer to game time, but if you look at the other Texas games, they're at like 29, 8, and $47. So clearly there's a lot of vitriol from the Arkansas side, as we know historically when it comes to Texas. And with an Arkansas team that's been playing better and quite frankly has more talent than Texas, the first game, if you're Texas, you got to remember what happened that first game. You got to be hungry because if you can't get up for this game, I'm sorry, then I don't know why you're even like, what are you even doing? If you can't get up for a rivalry game on the road when you're on the bubble after getting your butt handed to you by the worst team in the SEC, get up, play the game, go out there and win. Having said that, I don't see it happening because Arkansas, as I mentioned, playing better basketball. And when it comes down to it, I think that Texas just, as far as the matchups go, I think that Arkansas is a tough matchup for Texas with some of their physicality inside, their size, space, and they've been shooting better. I know Zvonimir Visic almost did well, he did worse than Tony Snell. He went like 0-14 and 0-10, 9-3, but um, I'm sure that won't happen again. But yeah, I just don't like this matchup for Texas, and I don't like walking into it feels like it. This doesn't feel like an ambush because I think it's coming. Like everybody knows it's coming, but it just feels like Texas is about to get rocked.
Yeah, tickets as low as $301 on StubHub against Texas on Wednesday night. Arkansas's last home game against Mississippi State on Saturday, March 8th, a Saturday, not a Wednesday night. Lowest ticket to get in for that game is $61. So clear that Arkansas is fired up for this rivalry. And Avicic, you mentioned an 0 for 9 shooting performance from three by him. He had 20 against their win over Missouri this past Saturday. And we know Arkansas, they've been able to show up in these big games. They have 3 wins against top 15 opponents. Um, I'm not sure how many wins against top 15 opponents Texas has this year. Can name one off the top of my head, but they clearly don't have the same. And it's clear that they're guys who have experience playing in big games. Wagner, Thiero, obviously Jonell Davis for FAU. They show up when it matters the most. And it's hard for me to believe that they won't do the same on Wednesday night, second to last home game for them. A lot of those players, Thiero, Jonell Davis, it could be their last go round. Even DJ Wagner, he had a big game on Saturday night against Missouri 17, I believe. He could be heading to the draft for all we know, too. And it could be a very difficult matchup for Texas because this Arkansas starting five, they bring a little bit of everything. Bisic, big man, can space the floor. Thiero's great inside. Davis and Wagner, obviously great scorers. So Texas defense is going to need to step up on Wednesday night. You guys have any predictions for how this one will fare for the Longhorns?
Well, I will say this. I'm inclined to agree with Seth. I just really don't. I'd be interested to know, and this could change my opinion on the game. I tried to look, I could not find a spread. I will say this. If it's less than like four, like if Arkansas is not at least a 4 point favorite, I'm gonna start getting nervous about this prediction, but I'll take the Razorbacks in a double digit win. If it's less than four, maybe Vegas knows something. They have computer algorithms. Bookmakers are called the wise guys for a reason. But unless something like that spooks me, I think Arkansas wins this by 10 plus. I mean, they've played the gauntlet like everybody else in the SEC. started off very poorly. I want to say they started off 0-6 in conference play. Okay, 0-5. They have completely got off the mat. They have showed the resiliency that we've been looking for from this Longhorn team all year. They've played great opponents and they have not been blown out in 5 weeks. All of their losses have been close in the past 5 weeks. They had a lopsided loss to Missouri about 5 weeks ago, then responded and returned the favor and beat the Tigers. Played Auburn close, played Tennessee close. Um, I even, I think they were just kind of shell shocked in a way from in the beginning of the season. Oh my God, we lost Boogie Flan. What are we going to do? And that took some adjustments from their coaching staff and their players. And they've ultimately figured out if there's one thing that can save Texas, this can sound cliche because it can save any basketball team. If they can hit some shots early, they do have a chance. Texas not shooting the lights out this year, but is a better shooting team from the field and from three, if you believe it or not, than Arkansas. That's going to be their one chance. Going to have to get probably two hot hands, which is going to mean Trey Johnson and another scorer, and they're going to have to lock up on the defensive end.
Yeah. Um, I think you look at the last 5 games for Texas, that's 4 losses. I personally, Kentucky feels like fool's gold when you think that. I know that Texas had some injury with Weaver and Kaluma, but Kentucky was missing their top 3 point guards. They and Trey Johnson and Traymon Mark played the game of his year with 30 points, 28, whatever it was, and Trey Johnson went absolutely ballistic. I mean, he's done that, but it just does not feel like you're winning that game. You play that game 5 times, it feels like you're winning that one once or twice. And if you play that in Lexington, you're not winning in 5 tries. So I'm really not. I mean, I know I've sounded really pessimistic about the Horns, but it just hasn't been, especially as of late, hasn't looked good. And with this Arkansas team kind of playing better basketball here, and they clearly have more talent across the roster than Texas does, and with the factor of the rivalry and the way that they're going to be amped up for this game, I think Arkansas wins 81-66.
Yeah, I'm going to go Arkansas here as well. I think they win 79-71.
Uh 88, honestly, I think this could get ugly. 82-66, Woo Pig Suey.
Yeah, Arkansas 2-3 in their last 5 since they played Texas. Wins at home to LSU and Missouri, lost on the road to A&M, Auburn, and at home to Bama. So those 3 losses, you could argue 3 of the best teams in SEC, maybe Tennessee over Texas A&M, but I think A&M's had a pretty good year, even though they lost to Tennessee this past weekend. On Saturday night, Texas returns to the Moody Center for a matchup against Georgia. Georgia, obviously led by their star freshman, Asia Newell. Newell, projected lottery pick in this year's draft, averaging around 15 points per game, 7 boards. Texas at home, 7 p.m. game, should be favored in this one. Georgia's also lost its last 4. Overall thoughts on Texas's matchup Saturday night at the Moody Center against Georgia?
You
Yeah,
go
I mean,
for
I think that when you look at this matchup, so assuming Texas drops the one in Fayetteville, you probably, when you look at the larger tournament picture, this probably at that point, because the bubble's weak, would put Texas in the first 4, so last 4 in. Um, Georgia lost 4 in a row, but they gave Auburn everything they could handle down in the plains, and I think that that should inspire some confidence for this Georgia team. And now, before they get Texas, they play Florida down a swamp. They got absolutely shellacked the first time around against Mike White's former school. And uh, just to give a little profile of this Georgia team, they do turn the ball over quite a bit. They rebound on the offensive glass pretty well, but they do a really poor job of preventing it, which you look at this, it's almost like they do have some similarities to Texas. They have some interesting vulnerabilities that match up in a decent way for Texas. And then they can't shoot the three well, but they defend it well. So it's almost like it's a lot of give and take here. They can do one thing well, they do the opposite. And then as far as their lineup goes, you got Silas Demery at junior at point guard, Dakota LaFew, Blue Kane. That's usually their three-headed guard lineup there. And then they'll either play RJ Godfrey at the four with Asa Newell at the five, or they'll go Newell at the four and then bring in Samto Surreal at the five. You got Tyron Lawrence and Deshane Montgomery off the bench. Deshane Montgomery has some, and Tyron Lawrence, they both have offensive capability. Deshane Montgomery missed a lot of like about 10 games at the beginning of the year because of academic ineligibility, so it took him a little bit to get going, and he's been dealing with a little minor injury. So it should be a good game, a game that's probably crucial for both teams because at that point you'll probably be looking at Texas as a last four in team and Georgia as a first four out team. So that's a this game and the game in obviously if you win the game in Fayetteville, that's a quad one win, huge game. But the game here in Austin against Georgia and the game against Oklahoma are just two massive have to win. You look at these last four, you gotta at least grab two to get yourself three. You're feeling comfortably in. Two, you're probably in, but like you might be going to Dayton. If you win one, you're sweating bullets, especially if you're Rodney Terry.
Absolutely. I'd even be nervous at two. I know the bubble is weak this year, but um, I don't know. I just feel like if you're the committee. Actually, I feel like it'd be the reverse. The committee would give a bigger program like Texas potentially the benefit of the doubt, given how tough the conference is. But there needs to be a sense of urgency with this team because, as y'all pointed out, three of these four teams are in the same position. And shoot, when they go to Stark Vegas next week, I believe that's their senior night, and that's a team looking to get a better seating. They're trying to strengthen their resume. Um, I think this is a much better spot to pick up one of those three necessary wins for the Horns. Much, much better spot than going to a cauldron of emotion in Fayetteville. Um, the thing is, though, who is going to stop Asa Newell? I mean, you guys said it. Likely lottery pick. Probably can't put Trey Johnson there because of the size profile. Is Kaluma quick enough? I don't know. Shedrick, I mean, that boy Shedrick, I don't know. I don't know what else to say about him. We didn't even touch on his inexplicable missed dunk in Columbia on Saturday night. Um, I'd be concerned about him getting in foul trouble. I think he presents a lot of problems for this Texas offense. I remember the three guard offense. I remember being optimistic when Texas went to Nashville. Seth, you were there to face Vanderbilt in their three guard attack, thinking, oh, this is a team without a lot of size. Texas could get on the boards and do what they got to do. And ultimately, that didn't happen. And they didn't have someone with Newell's size and talent. I think it's going to be close. I'm nervous about this one too, though.
Another thing you guys forgot to mention about Newell is he can defend too. And if I'm him, I'm looking at Trey Johnson, a guy that's projected to go ahead of him in many mock drafts. And I'm saying, you guys think he's better than me. Let me show you how it's done. And we obviously can do it offensively too, but he's a great perimeter defender. His size and athleticism provides lots of challenges for Texas. And by the way, he's a lefty. Mari Williams, lefty. Jeremiah Brakefield, lefty. Colin Murray Boyles, lefty. Texas has not done well against lefty big man this year, but this game matters a lot for Texas, and at home, I expect them to get it done. You mentioned that Oklahoma and Georgia are neck and neck with Texas in the conference. Georgia and Oklahoma 4-10 in conference play. Texas 5-9, but Texas and Georgia do have the same overall record before Texas matchup against Arkansas. I'm still going to go with the Horns here. Low scoring affair. Texas 74, Georgia 67.
I actually do think so. You look at this game. This is going to be a must-win game here. If I'm Georgia, I'm going with the three guard lineup and then putting Asa at the four, and then bringing Santos Sorrell in at the five. I think that's probably the way to play Texas, as we've seen Texas struggle with the bigs. You put Asa there at four, like that might be problems. Having said that, I do think this feels like the type of game I know we talked about the Missouri game earlier in the year. Obviously, Missouri's trended very well since that win or since that loss against Texas. But this is just one of those games you have that gut instinct feeling like their backs are going to be against the wall. You're going to get that star performance from Trey. You're going to get a star performance from whoever steps up as the number two. And it's just a game Texas ekes out. It might not be pretty. It might be pulled out late, but just a game Texas wins 72-70 against the Georgia Bulldogs in Austin.
I I'm in two minds about this game because that lineup spells trouble for Texas. Caden Shedrick, frankly, is not strong enough to be playing the five for a solid, Division One basketball team. Um, Kaluma, God bless him, he really tries. He can get good positioning. He's a bit undersized, and that's where Newell standing at 6'11" at the four could cause problems. But I agree. I think this is one of those Trey Johnson because the reverse point of the point you made, Will, is Trey Johnson is trying to show, hey, Newell, I am that good. I am like that. I'm gonna be out of here, after this season, but I am a top 10 pick. It's a primetime game. I'm gonna really call my shot here. I'm gonna say Trey goes for at least 25. I'm gonna say uh I'm going to say that you get a good enough game from Kaluma on the boards. I'm going to say Shedrick nearly or fouls out, and Texas wins on. I think it's going to be a buzzer beater from Johnson, Kaluma, or Mark at like legit a buzzer beater. Rock fight, as you said, Will. Um, 69-68 Texas.
Yeah, Ryan, right there with you with the rock fight. Georgia can't really score offensively, averaging 75 points per game. That ranks 163rd in the country. Defensively, they only allow 68 points per game, so a little bit different. But Georgia, we mentioned they lost their last four all-to-ranked opponents. They have lost their last 9 of 11, though. That is a little bit of cause for concern. And I'm with you on Trey Johnson. I'm sure he's going to be thinking the same thing when the Bulldogs come to Moody Center on Saturday night. And what I will say is when Johnson is on and on at home, he is different. And I've had a lot of fun when the Moody Center is rocking after Trey Johnson hits maybe an and one, two, threes in a row. It's been great in there, and especially when he catches fire. You guys have anything else before we wrap things up?
I would just quickly say that we talked about how what could happen in Fayetteville could greatly impact this weekend. Georgia tomorrow has Florida at home. Big, big rivalry game. I completely forgot, Seth. I don't know how I did about Mike White still being there in Athens. Of course, former coach of the Gators immediately went to Athens after he was fired. Um, that could be interesting because if they get humiliated by a rival at home, they might have a point to prove, just as Texas may have a point to prove. Or if they pull off the upset, do they look past Texas? If Texas pulls off the upset, do they look past Georgia? Very interesting.
And just general being on the in general being on the bubble. These two teams that are desperate for wins. Obviously, Georgia, a win in Austin is a quad one win. It's a top 75 road opponent. So it's Matt, and then for Texas, obviously that's a quad two win. So that's still a huge win for when it comes to looking at the tournament resume. So big week for both teams.
Big week for both teams on the bubble, indeed. Thank you guys so much for joining us here at the Burnt Orange Sports Network as we wrap things up for the 13th episode of the Bevo Buckets podcast. I'm Will Iger here with Ryan Hopper and Seth Berger. Please follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Burnt Orange Sports SN. Our individual Twitter accounts, Ryan_Hopper31, Will_Iger, and subscribe to our YouTube page, again, at Burnt Orange.
Mine's Seth Berger 02. It's not
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, forgot to mention Seth Berger 02 as well. Follow us all on Twitter. Obviously, Burnt Orange Sports Network on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube. Thank you guys again so much for joining us this week, and tune in this week to Texas 2 matchups against Arkansas and at home against Georgia on Saturday night. Thank you guys again for joining, and have a good one.